In this presentation, I demonstrate an inclusive Year 6 science investigation, highlighting 3 case studies from the nationally consistent collection of data on school students with disability, Tyra, Cooper, and Rakia. For this lesson, students investigate Earth's rotation, axial tilt, and revolution around the sun. Inclusion is much more than being present in the classroom. It requires shared and appropriately challenging curriculum, while anticipating barriers and providing adjustments to enable students to access, participate, and demonstrate learning. Inclusive planning begins with knowing my students through ongoing consultation with parents, professionals, and direct experiences with the student. It necessitates understanding strengths and functional barriers rather than diagnosis alone. Tyra is very careful and conscientious and certainly capable of high-quality work, but it's these high standards that often prevent her from completing her assignments. This perfectionism tends to increase the demands of open-ended activities as well. Social interaction has been affected by her anxiety, which can lead to isolation, and this is exacerbated by a difficulty to emotionally self-regulate. Cooper has cerebral palsy and moderate bilateral hearing impairment, but he has great specialist supports for when classroom activities create barriers, so his primary educational barrier is auditory excess. Rakia has mild hearing impairment and is developing English while also requiring trauma-related support. She has an emerging ability to self-regulate and an increasing confidence in seeking clarification. I therefore plan to ask what barriers my Earth-Sun investigation lesson might create and build upon the strengths and support my students. I first want the lesson to be accessible at whole class level. Universal Design for Learning, UDL, supports this through multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression. For example, all students will access the concept through spoken explanation, diagrams, an actual physical Earth-Sun model, and then they'll have the opportunity to use digital tools, and all will have more than one valid way to demonstrate their understanding of learning objectives. UDL, however, does not remove the need for individual adjustments. If universal supports do not adequately address a student's needs, then further targeted adjustments are required. If I hope to have an equitable learning outcome, then I must recognize that equitable access may require different pathways. Organization is also super important, as it can remove the barriers before they occur. Once my students are seated and quiet, I'll display the learning intentions and a visual sequence of each stage of the lesson. I'll explicitly demonstrate how the lamp represents the sun and the globe represents the earth before students work collaboratively with the physical models. To give an example, rather than suddenly announcing group work, Tyra will be aware that there will be group collaboration. She'll know who is in her group and what her role is going to be. This will reduce the potential for anxiety caused from the uncertainty. I would also plan to have Cooper's group situated in an area of the room with plenty of space, allowing him to participate as independently as possible. Rakia would have the same investigation steps available in numbered, written, and visual form, so that important information remain accessible after I stop talking. Using guided inquiry keeps students actively involved in predicting, observing, and explaining, while still allowing me to provide explicit structure and scaffolding when needed. Communication during this lesson must be deliberate and multimodal. For example, when I introduce rotation, the word, I'd say the word, display it beside a labeled diagram, and physically rotate the globe. For revolution, the word, I will move the globe around the lamp to clearly contrast the two movements. I would also use deliberate gestures, facial expressions, and calm, supportive tone, so my nonverbal communication reinforces what I'm saying. Pace is also important, particularly for Cooper and Rakia. So I'd position myself where they can see my face, gestures, and the model, and check understanding before introducing new information. Instructions will be kept short and sequential, followed by a pause and scan before adding the next step. Rather than asking, does everyone understand? I could ask students to demonstrate which movement produces day and night, point to the relevant part of the model, or explain their prediction. I would also use the established hearing technology and minimize ambient noises and rephrase information if the feedback suggests that it's been missed. Cultural responsiveness is another essential part of my inclusive classroom, which requires me to consider identity without making assumptions about what the identity means to an individual student. For Cooper, his First Nations identity is potentially a source of cultural and community connection, but I won't assume that this determines how he learns. In their chapter on classroom and parent-teacher partnerships, Mann and colleagues emphasize that respectful engagement with Indigenous families requires understanding connection to place, family relationships, and local community protocols. So for my lesson, I'd consult with Cooper and his family, and where appropriate, local traditional owners, elders, or community knowledge holders. Interestingly, a study conducted by Ruddle and colleagues found that connecting local Indigenous sky knowledge with Year 5 and 6 astronomy curriculum improved engagement. So collaboration with the local Aboriginal community being essential to that. This requires self-reflection on my own positionality. I've learned that students' perspectives cannot simply be inferred, so I need to routinely test my own assumptions through student voice, family consultation, and professional dialogue. For Cooper, that means not assuming his First Nations identity determines how he learns. And for Rakia, it means not interpreting developing English or reduced verbal participation as lower ability. Rakia requires a different form of cultural and linguistic responsiveness. Developing English is not itself a disability. The NCCD specifically distinguishes limited English proficiency from disability. So I'll maintain high expectations for her learning while ensuring she has the communication and language supports she needs. The guided investigation provides a clear example of how the same learning intention can require different pathways. Let's imagine that Tyra learns that each group is expected to give a presentation of learning to the class. If that public performance creates a substantial anxiety barrier, I'll maintain requirement to explain the science, but allow her to demonstrate that understanding through different means, such as a labeled diagram or a recorded explanation or a short verbal explanation directly to me. For Cooper, imagine that manipulating the globe required while moving around the lamp involved more of a physical barrier than I had expected. Rather than asking another student to complete the task for him, I could stabilize or reposition the equipment or allow Cooper to direct a peer's movement of the model while he predicts, observes, and explains what's occurring or will occur. For Rukia, if she appears uncertain after a multi-step verbal instruction, I'll return to the numbered visual sequence, demonstrate the next step, and check her understanding through a specific question. In each case, it's important to note that I'm adjusting access rather than unnecessarily reducing the cognitive demand of the lesson. Inclusion also involves the student's social experience of learning. If Tyra finds collaboration and investigation difficult, allowing her to work alone may reduce immediate anxiety, but could also remove opportunities for peer connection. Instead, I can reduce the social demand through a familiar peer, a small group, a predictable role, and explicit turn-taking. Rakia likewise needs meaningful opportunities to communicate with peers rather than interacting primarily with adults. So the physical Earth-Sun model provides a shared focus around which communication can occur. Structured cooperative learning is useful because meaningful participation does not automatically occur when students are placed into groups. Shared goals, clear roles, and individual accountability create genuine ways for each student to contribute and can support peer connection and belonging. Digital technology should be selected because it removes a barrier or expands access, not simply because it's available. So I've chosen Nassau Space Place for this lesson because it provides labeled visual representations of rotation, axial tilt and revolution. It gives the students another way to make sense of an abstract relationship alongside the physical model that we have in the classroom. And this will be particularly useful for the students that need more than just spoken instruction to understand the concept. I'd also evaluate whether the broader adjustments are working by looking for evidence of improved access, participation in learning, alongside student feedback. If an adjustment is ineffective, I change the support rather than lower expectations or locate the problem within the student. Inclusive practice also requires collaboration and recognizing the limits of my professional role. With Tyra, I implement classroom strategies developed with her family and psychologist. For Cooper and Rakia, specialist and family advice needs to translate into everyday classroom access, where needs extend beyond my expertise. I'd follow school referral processes and seek appropriate specialist advice or professional learning. The Disability Discriminations Act and disability standards for education also shape the kind of classroom environment I want to establish. I'd explicitly teach and model expectations for respectful participation, making it clear that teasing, exclusion, or intimidation related to disability or adjustment is unacceptable, and actively monitor peer interactions rather than waiting for a student to report a problem. If harassment or bullying does occur, I'd respond promptly according to school procedures while ensuring students have a safe and accessible way to seek help. At the same time, I need to really distinguish between behavior from barriers, for example, not interpreting missed auditory information from Cooper, Rakia's processing needs, or Tyra's anxiety-related difficulty participating as deliberate non-compliance. The NCCD then provides evidence of the adjustments being implemented and reviewed, making inclusion an ongoing cycle of consultation, adjustment, monitoring, and reflection. Tyra, Cooper, and Rakia work toward the same scientific understanding, but barriers are addressed through intentionally proactive design and responsive adjustments. By combining accessible communication, culturally responsive relationships, structured participation, student and family voice, specialist collaboration, and ongoing assessment, I can maintain high expectations while improving each student's opportunity to participate, achieve, and belong. Thank you.